Hello and welcome to the world's most famous podcast. I'm your host, Jacqueline Maddison. Today we have a very special guest, Stephen Eoannou. He is an award-winning author known for his compelling storytelling, historical fiction, and ability to weave gripping narratives that captivate readers. His works include After Pearl, Rook, Yesteryear, and a short story collection, Muscle Cars. These showcase his deep understanding of character and history and the power of storytelling. So today we explore his journey as a writer and his creative process and the inspiration behind his exceptional works. Let's welcome Stephen to the show.
There.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to congratulate you on your recent works. I'm so excited to learn more about your talent of writing, which I'm a huge fan of. I enjoy playing with words myself.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for sure. But it's a lot of work too. You know that.
Yeah, that's true. So why don't we get started with you telling us a little bit about what drew you initially to storytelling and writing?
I think a lot of it has to do with growing up, and my father was a great storyteller. And I think growing up, listening to his stories about coming over from Greece when he was a little boy and growing up in during the Depression. Um, I hung on those stories. And to be honest with you, I stole a lot of those stories for my second novel, Yesteryear. They were great stories. Things about his friend Lefty, who was a dog thief and a alcoholic boxer who would come into my grandfather's restaurant and give his diamond ring to my father to hold because he felt a bender coming on.
That's so
Those are,
funny.
yeah, I
I mean,
stole all of
truth is
those.
stranger than fiction. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
it was 80, 90 years ago, granted, but it was kind of like the Wild West a little bit. There's a lot of not a lot of rules were followed, and he just told great stories. And both my parents, my dad was a voracious reader, and my mom was until she stopped for whatever reason. And my older sisters were all big readers. So I think I progressed from that listening to the stories to seeing all my family reading, and then making my sisters drag me to the library. I think that's where it all started, to be honest with you.
That's awesome. So, what was the first book you ever wrote?
The first book I wrote, or the first book I got published,
Um,
because there's a lot of different answers. Um,
sure. Whichever one
so
you want to speak of.
so the first book that I had published was my short story collection called Muscle Cars, and
Mhm.
that came out in 2015, 10 years ago already.
Cool.
And that was my master's thesis for my MFA. And I tell people it's 17 short stories about guys making bad decisions. I had to stop at 17, and it's only semi-autobiographical.
That's hilarious. So now, have there been other authors or books that have had an impact on your writing style, or is it just your natural God-given talent that you're sharing?
No, I mean, I think everything you read influences you either for good or for bad. But the ones that really stood out were John Irving. When I was in
Mm.
high school, the Hotel New Hampshire just came out. And I remember it was actually serialized in Rolling Stone when Rolling Stone used to be a big newspaper. And my sister and I would fight over it when it was delivered because we wanted to read the next installment of the Hotel New Hampshire. And then for that Christmas, my sister Sue bought me that book as a gift. And when I read it in its entirety, I was struck by how Irving was such a genius at making you laugh until you realized how sad it really was. And
Yeah,
then it was just like an emotional, slamming on the brakes. And I love that about his especially his early work.
that's
So that
excellent.
influenced me a lot. And then William Kennedy, the author from Albany, New York, and his Albany trilogy, Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, Legs, and then he won the Pulitzer for Ironweed. He had such a sense of place in all his writing, but especially in the Albany series. that I thought, man, if he could do that for Albany, nothing against Albany, I could do that for Buffalo. And so I kind
Mm.
of carved out Buffalo, New York as my literary turf to explore, just the way Kennedy carved out Albany.
I love that. So your books, Rook and Yesteryear, have received high praise, but now you've just completed After Pearl, which is your latest novel. Tell me about the story and what inspired this one.
Well, I call After Pearl my pandemic story, even though it has nothing to do with the pandemic.
Hmm.
I started it a couple weeks before lockdown, and and then we were locked down, and so I kept my job, luckily, so my 9 to 5 didn't change. Then after 5 o'clock, there was nothing to do except, um, watch Netflix or write, and so I really worked hard on After Pearl. Um, and After Pearl is, and I blogged about this. I During the pandemic, I blogged that we read to escape. I wrote to escape
Mm-hmm.
because I was alone in a big house with a one-eyed dog and no place to go. Um, so I really wrote Pearl, which is a mystery, noir mystery set in the during World War II, purely as an escapism for myself, just to get away from the isolationism of COVID.
Yeah.
And I blogged it. I said, I don't know if this will ever get published or not, but I'm just doing it for myself. And it really was an escape for me.
Well, I feel
Um,
like that's what reading is. I think we all love to pick up a book and just dive into the world that the pages take us into. That's the magic of writing, So that's why like
yeah,
your talent is such a wonderful gift to have and to be able to share. So how do you approach research when it comes to your writings and historical fiction?
yeah, I did a lot of research for Yesteryear. And that novel is about a man named Franz Stryker, who a lot of people may not recognize his name, but you would recognize his writing, the characters he created, like the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet.
Mhm.
And you may not know his name because he sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10 before the Lone Ranger exploded. So he missed
Wow.
out on a fortune.
Hmm.
So with that book, I did a lot of research about Fran, a lot of research about the Lone Ranger, a lot of research about the early days of radio. And I was very lucky, and with that novel, is that Fran was from Buffalo. And when he passed away in the early 1960s, his estate left all his papers to the University of Buffalo, and I'm an alumni. So
Mm.
I had access to their special collections library
Oh,
where and
cool.
there's about 13 cartons of manuscripts, radio plays, correspondence, telegrams that I got to go through,
Oh, I
original
love it. Just a
manuscripts.
whole wealth of information that you can use as
Oh yeah.
ingredients for your stories. That's so
Oh, it was
awesome.
great. It was great fun. All memorabilia from
Yeah.
the early days of radio. It was a real blast. So I did a
Yeah.
lot of research for that. Rook, also based on a true story about a man named Al Nussbaum. Al was grew up in the 50s here in Buffalo. Would tell his wife he was going out of town. He was an entrepreneur. He was going out of town for work, but Al's work was robbing banks. It's a true story,
Oh, ooh,
and he
that's
robbed them. Yeah,
thrilling.
yeah, yeah. That was an interesting dinner conversation. Um,
Yeah.
but he robbed 6 or 7 banks before his wife or the FBI knew what he was doing and who was robbing these banks on the East Coast.
Wow.
So for that, I did a lot of research, not as much as Yesteryear, but a lot of research with the newspapers from that time period. And Al also became a writer while in prison. Which gives me hope, right? A second career.
Yes.
And so I was able to track down his original writing, on eBay and use bookstores. So to that degree, I did a lot of research. For After Pearl, not as much as the other two novels, but a lot about being a house detective in a hotel. Did a lot of research on that. My detective is an alcoholic, so a lot of research on alcoholism. Um,
Mm.
and like I said, there was no place to go when I was writing that book. So I could get online and just research away during
Yeah,
COVID.
I know. I think the COVID was a blessing in disguise for a lot of people who I spoke to actually said, this was a time where I actually had a chance to reassess my life and focus on things that I've always wanted to do, my creative passions. And so
Yeah.
I also kind of feel like God put a timeout on all of us and said, okay, go to your room, stay in your house, and just think about your lives and what you're really doing with it. So I thought
Yeah.
it was a great opportunity for us to, like what you did, create something from your pure talent and passion.
Yeah, it's funny, talking to other creative people, not just writers, but visual artists who are friends of mine. And it seemed like it was split down the middle. Some people were like me that just use it as an opportunity to escape and work, and other creatives they just could not produce anything just because it was so stressful and so
Yeah, yes, so
such a
sweet.
frightening time. So I was very lucky that I was able to kind of channel that into my work.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, what does your writing routine look like? Do you have a specific ritual or habits? How do you get into the zone?
People ask me that question. They're always disappointed in my answer because I have zero rituals. I have my day job still. So I write every day from 5 till 7 in the morning. Um, so
That's
that's the only
awesome.
time I
I
have.
love it.
And so I try to make the most of that, at least a 2 hour period.
Hmm.
So I literally, the alarm goes off at quarter to 5, or I wake up on my own, and I literally turn on the light, roll over, put my glasses on, and grab the laptop. And I usually start
And the magic
where I,
happens.
well, I don't know about that, but I usually start where I started the previous day and edit that. And when I'm comfortable that that is as good as I can get it now, I'll start producing, hopefully, some new pages for that
Right.
day.
Yeah.
But
I
no
think that's
candles,
fantastic.
no music, nothing. The only weird thing, quirky thing I have is that all my works in progress has to have a title, even if it changes 10 times before it's finished. They all have to have a name.
I love that.
It's never the bank robber novel or,
Right.
the mystery novel. It has to have a name. And that's my only really quirky thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you have this like intention of what you're creating, and I love how you work in silence because hey, there's truth to that saying, silence is golden. I think that
Yeah.
I say silence is where angels go to whisper. So it's like that's where we
Oh,
kind of get our divine inspiration, for our creative
yeah.
work. So it's important to have that time of silence, whether you're working or prayer or meditation, whatever it is,
Yeah.
to get into that space of creativity, which I think is
And
part
there's,
of our divine self.
and there's something, I don't want to say mystical or magical, but there's
No,
something about
absolutely.
going from that sleep dream state right into creating fiction. There's
Mhm.
something weird about that kind of
Mhm.
gray area when you're not really quite awake,
Yeah.
but you're hitting the keyboards. There's something that kind of frees your mind up, I think, to
Yeah, I
maybe
agree. Like
wander.
for me, when I get into my spiritual, my creative zone, it does feel kind of mystical and spiritual because it transcends kind of the natural, if you know what I'm saying, and I kind of get into a
Hmm.
zone of this power of creativity. Um, as a Christian, God says we're created in his image and he is the creator. So we're born to create, right? So I feel like we tap into something divine when we get into that
Yeah.
creative space for sure.
Norman Mailer, he wrote that book, writing the spooky art. And it is spooky. You write something yesterday and you don't remember that sentence that you so who wrote that sentence? That's pretty good. And it's but you must have done it. Or you have no idea why your character went right when you thought he or she were going to go left. But it worked, and it's kind of like that spooky
Right.
when things
Yeah.
come together that you can't explain.
Absolutely. I love it. So now your characters feel incredibly real and complex. How do you go about crafting them? Is it forethought or you let them sort of take on a life of their own as you write?
Yeah, there's not much forethought in any of my writing, to tell you the
That's
truth.
brilliant. I mean, that's
You know,
incredible. What a gift. What a
yeah,
talent.
Well, it's you know what it is? I think it's just that at this stage in my life, I'm not afraid.
Mm,
And I have this faith that it's going to work out, even though I
yeah,
don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing.
right.
Um, so, like with After Pearl, I mean, it's a mystery. It's a noir mystery set in 1942, and I didn't know who done it until the last 20, 30 pages of the book,
That
probably.
is
Um,
amazing.
yeah,
How
and I just
fun.
it is fun.
Mhm.
And you're kind of like the private eye too. You're following the clues. Oh, that was a dead end, but that's okay. Oh, that didn't work out. That's a red herring. I'll leave that in.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
you kind of find your way. But you can't overthink it or it'll paralyze you.
Right. It's
Um,
true.
so I don't have like a wall with sticky notes on it or anything like that. I don't start from an outline. What I'll do is I'll write a chapter, and I'm one of those people that write really slowly, and I can't leave a sentence until it's as good as I can get it.
Hmm.
Um, and so when I'm finished a chapter, I'll take a piece of tag board, like we used to do our school projects,
Hmm.
and I'll chapter one, and I'll put, the characters, the scene, a couple sentences to remind me what took place, then scene two, scene three, however long that chapter is. And then as the book grows, I have it written out like where I am, and I lost that plot thread in chapter five. I haven't talked about this character since chapter six. It
Hmm.
helps me visualize if I have
Hmm.
to make corrections along the way. And then I also take notes as I'm writing, which it seems people like, well, you take notes before, right? I'll take them while I'm drafting the novel, saying,
Hmm.
okay, these five questions have to be answered. Um, and a reminder that this needs to take place before this needs to. And so I review the tag board and my notes, and somehow that keeps me on track.
It almost sounds like a director's process a little bit, storyboarding it out. What are your sort of
Yeah.
hopes or wishes for these? Would you like them to be made into films, or you just want to keep producing novels as a writer? What?
No. Yes.
Oh,
I think that'd be
okay.
awesome.
Oh,
And it's
wonderful.
funny when I finished After Pearl, I had this writing group with these amazing women that I met in grad school. And one of them is Carla Damron, who wrote a great novel called The Orchid Tattoo. And she's a crime novelist. And so I
Mhm.
sent her the book, and she goes, "Is this a series?" And I go, "No, I wrote it during COVID. It's just a standalone, it's just a one off." She goes, "No, I
Mhm.
think it could be a series." And then she gave me her criticism, took that into account, made changes, sent it off to Ashley Warlick. Her last book was The Arrangement.
Mm.
And her first question was, "Is this a series?" And I go, "No, wrote it during COVID, one off, just was trying to get through the pandemic, not going to be another one." So I finished it. I sent it off to my publisher, and he goes, "Is this a series? Because I
Wow.
think somebody like Netflix would like this." And I
Mm.
said, "Yes, it's a series with no plan for book two, no idea what the second book would be. But, I saw her Netflix in Hollywood. So, yeah, sign me up."
Yep.
So I just completed and signed the contract for the second book in the Nicholas Bishop mystery series. And After
Mm.
Pearl's the first one, and The Falling Woman that's going to be out in spring of 2027 is the second in the series. So, if
Excellent.
anybody in Hollywood's watching,
Give
can talk.
Stephen a call. Speaking of, how can people find you and get in touch with you and get the books?
Yeah, I mean, a great place to go is my website, which is www.sgeoannou.com, EOANNOU.com. And there's a ton of information out on that website, how to get my books, short stories that were not anthologized or in muscle cars. There's links to those. But I always tell people the most important page of my website is the last page, and that's the contact page. And they
Yes.
can reach out to me anytime. I love hearing from readers,
Mm.
and I answer all inquiries that come my way. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out, and let me know what you think of my work.
I love it. Do you ever get writer's block, and how do you handle it if you do? It seems like you don't, since you're so disciplined in your writing process. You know, the daily commitment to it, the daily
Yeah,
devotion. Um,
yeah. I can't remember ever having um, writer's block,
hmm.
but I went 30 years where I wasn't writing well.
Ah.
And I wasn't getting published. So, I started when I was in college, seriously, with my first writing classes and saying, this is what I want to do. And about that time, guys like Jay McInerney and Brett Lott and all those American male authors were getting published, and they were all under 30. Chabon was in that group. And I thought, well, that'll be me. And then, 30 came and went, 40 came and went. And I think Muscle Cars, I was 52, I think, when Muscle Cars finally was published. So that was my first book. So never had writer's block, but I wrote really, really badly for a long period of time.
Well, some of us are like an aged fine wine, and you
There
sort
you
of
go.
mature into your creative potential a little later, and that's completely fine.
Yeah, we're all on our own timelines, right? And
That's exactly right.
so
And
I,
so
I
it's a
think one of
beautiful journey of self-discovery. But go on.
it is, yeah, it is. And I think a lot of the reasons why it took so long for me to get published is I was writing in isolation. I had no one to share my work with, no one to give me feedback. And so when people ask me, like, what advice can I give somebody starting out or a new writer, I would say, find your group. It doesn't have to be an MFA program, but that's where it all happened to come together for me.
Hmm.
But your local writers group, find people that are serious and that you trust, and get their feedback. Go to conferences. Join groups like Sisters in Crime and various other writing groups that are available to get that feedback and be around creative people because we feed off each other.
Yeah, it's true. You do inspire each other. So, what themes do you find yourself most drawn to in your writing, and why do you suppose that is?
Yeah, a lot of themes of loss, of economic hardship, regret. And having said those three or four things,
Mm.
um, there's a lot of humor in my writing, so it's not quite as depressing as it may have sounded. And I think just growing up in Buffalo, in an industrial town that went through some really hard times in the late 60s, really up until recently, there was always, the weather was hard, the economy was hard,
Yeah.
getting a job was hard. I think that has a lot to do with the idea of the economic pressures my all my characters seem to be under, and
Mhm.
sometimes they turn to crime because of that. Um,
Right.
but I also think a lot of it is the idea of loss can be many things. Um, when Buffalo has lost a tremendous amount of population because people followed the jobs, right? So they moved south and they moved west,
Mhm.
um, and so the idea of loss of people just leaving, and so it's not like it is now when we have the internet and we can Zoom like this and see each other. Like when
Yeah.
people from I went to high school with that I saw every day for 12 years. When they left and didn't come back, I didn't see him again until our 30 high school reunion
Yeah.
because there wasn't that ability to keep in touch. So
Uh-huh.
loss is a huge, huge part of I think all my work.
I think that's interesting because I think a lot of times themes sort of become the signature of a writer, and that's what attracts the audience and the yeah, the audience, for your work. And I think
Yeah,
that those particular themes are very real human experiences that we can all relate to, and so I think when a work touches kind of such a deep part of our human experience, it's more powerful. But I love that you pepper it with humor, because I think that it's just makes the more difficult or harsh realities of life more palatable, and helps us get through. So I love
yeah, and
that
I
you do
think
that
those.
in your writing,
I
because we're
I think
going through the experience through the book.
Yeah, and I think it goes right back to John Irving and his influence on me early on, incorporating humor. And
Mhm.
with After Pearl, my main character is a private eye, um, and his nickname is Nicky the Weasel because he doesn't have that moral compass that is kind of
Yeah, right.
you
That
associate
you
with
should have.
you're right. That noir detectives, have as their moral code. He's a very shady character. He's battling alcoholism, not likable in a lot of ways.
Mm,
So, how do I make him appealing to my readers? Why would you care about this guy? And so I
right.
hopefully I did that with because he's a funny character and he says funny things. He uses humor as self-defense in a lot of time and as deflection and also with his backstory. So the hope is that the combination of the humor and Bishop's backstory makes you find him interesting and want to keep turning the pages to find out
Yeah,
what
or
happens to him.
entertaining. For some reason, I'm picturing like Joe Pesci type, like you know, he's awful, awful character, but so
Yeah,
sometimes funny where he's still likable.
yeah.
So, and
That
I
humor
think
just
that
kind of
works
opens the door.
well in television or in movies,
Hmm.
when your works are moved to that medium. So
Yeah.
now, how do you feel about self-publishing versus traditional publishing to other writers out there listening?
Yeah, because that wasn't really an option when I was coming up, right? Because
Mm,
self-publishing really had a stigma about it in the 80s and 90s. It was a vanity press, and you're going to get ripped off, and you're not really a writer, and blah blah blah. So publishing has changed so much. So I think a lot of those cases that stigma has been lifted. Um, and there's countless examples of how self-published works have gone on to been very successful and won awards. To me, it was never an option, just because it wasn't an option growing up.
right.
And then it was always my goal to be traditionally published, right? Because that's all we knew. That was always the goal. So I never thought, well, if no one else will publish, I'll publish it myself. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get that validation that comes with signing a contract. And quite frankly, it's a lot of work to self-publish,
Mhm.
um, you know, finding the editors that you can work with and finding the artists that can do the cover art and writing ad copy. I don't know how to do any of those things. And that's really where the traditional publisher can come in and help you out and take some of that burden off.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense. So, what do you hope readers take away from your books, if there is sort of a common thread amongst them or individually?
yeah, well, the basic, I think, for all writers is a good story. Can this guy write a good story?
Mm,
And hopefully, if they think, yeah, Yesteryear was a good story, that will lead them to After Pearl. And hopefully, they'll say, oh, that was a good mystery. Let me read the second one. The Falling Woman. So, at the very basic level, it's is it a good story?
mm,
That's the key thing. I still think that one of the nice things about writing historical fiction is you can take on some social themes um, that are current today that were just as current in 1942, but you kind of surround it in that historical context, and
mhm.
you don't come off, sort of preachy um, or you can be more subtle, I guess it is, but
Yeah.
you're really dealing with the same concepts and the same troubles that the country was facing 80, 90 years ago, and they're the same as today.
Right.
So I like that about historical fiction.
I
You
love
asked
it.
about research earlier. I like to go to the central library and just um, flip through old newspapers on the microfiche from the 30s or
Right?
40s just to see what grabs my attention or
Yeah, right.
um, but it's funny. You read the headlines. It's problems in the Middle East. Problems with Russia.
Huh.
Economy's not doing well. There's going to be another blizzard in Buffalo. It's the same news.
Yeah.
you
That's
know
so
the,
interesting.
the dates and names of the players are different, but the challenges are still there. And historical
Mhm.
fiction has a way of making that being a little sneaky and slipping the messages through.
That's so cool that you get to sort of create this world around your characters and then also build their personal world through your writing. What an
Yeah.
amazing gift. So, what is there anything you would have done differently in your writing career? As they say, hindsight is 2020. Looking back.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is what I already mentioned, find that group. Find that group. And I tried. Honestly, I did. I moved around a lot in my 20s. Um, and I would try to find a local writers group, and I'd find them, but they were more interested in like eating or drinking wine, which is great. I like doing those things. But when you tell me, give me 5 minutes, I haven't finished your story yet, then we'll talk about it. Well, you really haven't thought about it. You really wouldn't have give it much of a deep critique. I wrote this on the bus into work this morning. Tell me what you think. And I said, well, I don't have to read it. I know it's going to sound like you wrote it on the bus on the way to work in the morning. So I couldn't find that group that was as serious about writing as I was and am until I went to Queen's University of Charlotte to get my MFA program. And you don't have to go to an MFA program to become a writer. But that was my last swing at it. I thought, man, I've been trying for 30 years. And I'm no closer now than I ever was. This will be my last chance. And
And
all
it
of a sudden
worked.
something, and it worked. Something clicked.
Right?
I don't
It was
know.
the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and I had lived enough,
Yeah,
had experienced life more at 50
exactly.
than I did at 25. Um,
Yeah. That's what I
and
think. I think that like as a success journey is timing. It is sometimes just a matter of timing, and like you said, you had a certain experience, and you
yeah,
mature, and you kind of are ready for the success or the next step. So that's why it's okay to be a late bloomer, because your
yeah,
life journey is for a reason and a purpose to get you to be who you need to be to fulfill your potential a little
yeah.
later on.
And I just think being surrounded by all those creative people and who are serious and trying to do the same thing I was doing.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I've got, 4 or 5 of these amazing women I can share my work with
That's awesome.
um, and share, I went to this conference, you should go. It was great. Or this journal is accepting submissions. We've had a text string since 2013. And a lot of it's
Wow.
nonsense, but a lot of it is about writing
Yeah.
and our
But it
work.
also gives you a sense of a support system, and like you're not alone in
Absolutely.
this pursuit. And that is encouraging,
Yeah.
in the journey.
So
So,
if I had to
yeah.
do anything differently to answer your question, yeah, is I would have tried. I would have realized how important having that network and try harder to find one rather than saying, no one's as serious as I am, and then just go off on my own and struggle.
You're right, and in isolation.
Hmm.
So your characters, do you get inspiration from real life people for them, or how do you
Yeah, I think
you do?
all 3 novels. Yeah. The Rook was based on the life of a Al Nussbaum, that the bank robber.
Uh-huh.
So that helped a lot. And then, I fictionalized him. Same thing with Franz Stryker. I fictionalized him. And then with um, Bishop, my private eye, and after Pearl, um, I was sitting alone in a bar, which I like to do, to eavesdrop and people watch and
Right.
have a drink or two. And I'm sitting there at this bar called the Left Bank, and I was thinking about, because I had watched a movie the night before on Netflix, and it was a current movie, but it was the same type of detective character that Dashiell Hammett created in the you know 20s and 30s. It's that moral code.
Mm.
Um, could drink a quart of whiskey and not have any ill effects. Can fight anybody and win. Gets all the girls. And I was thinking about that, and I go, what if I, write a novel, a hard-boiled novel with a character who doesn't have that code, who's not the archetypical, private eye in the noir world? What if I kind of subvert that genre? And then, like I said, Norman Mailer said that writing is a spooky art. I'm sitting at this bar, and I think of this guy, a friend of my mom's from growing up, and his nickname was Mickey the Bug because he was kind of like this little insect guy. And during World War II, he was in San Francisco. He was going to ship out to the Pacific. He was waiting for his orders, and he got drunk and stepped in front of a cab and was hit. And his injuries were so bad that after he healed, they didn't send him overseas. They sent him home. And so my mother, who didn't have a kind word to say about many people, thought that Mickey had stepped in front of that cab on purpose to get out of going to the Pacific.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
I thought of that out of the blue, writing's a spooky art.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about Mick in 30 years. I could barely picture what he looked like. And I thought, well, what if my private eye did that? What if, and why would he? Maybe he's an alcoholic, and that's why he did it. And maybe it's ambiguous if
the plot
if he stepped in front.
thickens.
Yeah, and I'm just sitting here, at this bar, getting more and more excited.
Yeah.
And I go, and then, maybe he walks with a cane, right? Because his foot was damaged.
Yep.
And so right away, he's not your typical noir private eye because now he's physically handicapped. He's not going to outrun you and chase you down. He's not going to beat you up. He is a alcoholic, but I wanted to show the consequences of drinking that quart of bourbon. So even Bishop was based on that one story of my mom's best friend's brother from the Depression.
That's amazing. I love it. But the world around us is a canvas of artistry to select from and pull from in terms of inspiration. So now what legacy do you hope to leave behind as a writer?
Wow, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. That's a really good question. I think at a very personal level, I'd like, when I move on to whatever's next, I want my kids to say, wow, Dad wrote these, 8 or 9 or 20 novels, whatever it's going to end up to be. So that's what he was doing up in his office.
Or dream bigger. Let's see the works on screen and impacting, the world around us.
So personally, I think it would be like my kids saying, wow, my dad did this. My dad
that.
wrote that. So, and then on a broader screen, I like to be, when people think of writers from Buffalo, I hope my name enters the conversation.
There we go.
And then lastly, on a national or international scale, just to be read and continue to be read would be a win.
Yes, absolutely. Stephen, it has been such an honor to spend some time with you today to learn more about your writing gift and talent that you're sharing with the world, and a little bit more about your insights. I'm really looking forward to reading your works, but also I do hope to see them on the screen, whether as a series or as a film one day, because your storytelling and specifically historical, in historical context is remarkable. So I commend you for your work. And is there anything else you'd like to add or share? Or again, tell us where our listeners can reach you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm on X. Just look for my last name, Eoannou, and I'll come up. I guarantee it. And then my website, www.sgeoannou.com. There's more information on that site than you would ever want to know about me, but it's all there. And like I said before, the most important page is the last one where you can contact me. So feel free to reach out.
Well, I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for being with us today, Stephen.
Oh, thanks for having me.
See you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.